Well, folks, pull up a chair. I want to talk to you about something that happened this week that tells you more about effective political strategy than 1,000 consultants could explain, about what it means to actually get things done when you're dealing with someone who cares more about ego than policy, about how you navigate a system where the person with the most power is also the person most easily manipulated if you understand what drives him. Zohran Mamdani, a 34-year-old state senator from New York, walked into the Oval Office this week to meet with Donald Trump, the same Donald Trump who'd threatened to take away Mamdani's citizenship and deport him, the same Trump who calls Democratic lawmakers seditious and suggests they should be hanged, the same Trump who just days earlier called a female reporter piggy and went on social media advocating for members of Congress to be executed. And Mamdani, this young Democratic socialist who ran on free child care and free buses and lowering costs for street vendors. This guy who pulled 1% when he first started running, this person Trump should theoretically hate, walked out of that meeting with what he wanted, with cooperation, with commitments, with Trump playing the beneficent godfather instead of the petulant child we usually see. How did that happen? How does someone Trump threatened to deport get a productive meeting while allies get ambushed? How does a Democratic socialist get better treatment than world leaders who've been trying to manage Trump for years? How does a state senator with no federal power get the President of the United States to not just meet with him, but to publicly give him permission to call him a fascist? The answer tells you everything about what's wrong with how most Democrats approach Trump, about what establishment politicians don't understand, about what happens when you actually think strategically instead of just reacting emotionally, about how you get things done when the person you're dealing with cares more about appearing powerful than about actual power. Let me walk you through what Mamdani did, because every step was calculated, every move was strategic, every moment was designed to give Trump what he needs emotionally while getting what Mamdani needs practically. It's a masterclass in understanding leverage, in knowing what you want and what the other person wants, and figuring out how to give them theirs while getting yours. First, Mamdani asked publicly for the meeting, didn't go through back channels, didn't have intermediaries negotiate. Just said out loud, in public, I want to meet with President Trump to discuss how we can work together for New York. That's important, because asking publicly, especially after Trump threatened him, that plays to Trump's ego, makes him look magnanimous, look powerful, look like someone who's secure enough to meet with critics. Trump loves that, loves the image of being the bigger person, the guy who's so confident he can sit down with anyone. The leader who's above petty grudges. It's performance. It's theater. But it's theater Trump desperately wants to be in. So when Mamdani created the opportunity for that performance, Trump couldn't resist. Second, Mamdani prepared Trump for how to save face after the meeting. You can see it in how the press conference went, in how Trump responded to questions, in how both of them navigated the obvious tension between what Mamdani has said about Trump and what they were trying to accomplish together. None of that was accidental. That was rehearsed. That was Mamdani understanding that Trump needs an exit strategy, needs a way to look good, needs talking points that let him claim victory. Watch how it played out. A reporter asked Mamdani about calling Trump a despot, about saying he betrayed the country, about accusing him of having a fascist agenda, and Mamdani pivots, doesn't back down, doesn't apologize, but also doesn't make it about the insults, makes it about the work, about serving New Yorkers, about focusing on shared purpose instead of disagreement. That gives Trump an opening, and he takes it, says he's been called much worse, says it's not that insulting, says maybe Mamdani will change his mind after they work together. It's classic Trump, making it about him, about his magnanimity, about his willingness to work with critics. But here's the thing. Mamdani gave him that line, set it up, created the opportunity for Trump to play the role he wants to play. Then the reporter pushes, asks directly whether Mamdani thinks Trump is a fascist. And this is where it gets brilliant, because Mamdani starts to answer, starts to explain, and Trump interrupts, says you can just say yes, says it's easier than explaining, says he doesn't mind. And suddenly Trump is giving Mamdani permission to insult him, is making himself look secure enough, powerful enough, confident enough to let someone call him a fascist to his face in the Oval Office. That's not weakness from Trump. That's ego. That's someone so desperate to appear magnanimous that he'll tolerate insults if it makes him look like the bigger person. And Mamdani understood that. Understood that Trump would rather look powerful than actually be respected, would rather play Godfather than enforce loyalty, would rather perform confidence than demand deference. So Mamdani let Trump win the performance while Mamdani won the substance. Let Trump look magnanimous while getting commitments on policy. Let Trump play the role he wanted while achieving the goals that actually matter. That's strategy. That's understanding leverage. That's knowing what you want and how to get it from someone who's predictable if you understand what drives him. Now, contrast that with how establishment Democrats usually deal with Trump. They take the bait, get emotional, make it personal, fight on Trump's terms instead of their own, treat every interaction as a moral test instead of a tactical opportunity, and they lose. Not because they're wrong substantively, but because they don't understand the game they're playing. Look at what happened in the House the same day Mamdani was meeting with Trump. Republicans put up a resolution denouncing socialism. Classic Republican tactic. Force Democrats to vote on something designed to make them look bad either way. Vote yes and you're betraying progressive principles. Vote no and you're endorsing socialism, which Republicans will use against you in ads. It's a trap, an obvious trap, the kind of thing any competent political operation should see coming. But 85 Democrats, including Hakeem Jeffries, the House Democratic leader, voted for it, fell for it completely, hook, line, and sinker, voted to denounce socialism, which means denouncing public education and Social Security and Medicare and half the programs their constituents depend on. Why? Because they were afraid of the attack ads, afraid of being called socialists, afraid of Trump and Republicans using it against them. So they voted to denounce their own principles, to undermine their own arguments, to give Republicans exactly what they wanted, which is Democrats on record saying progressive policies are bad. That's not strategy. That's panic. That's letting Republicans define the battlefield and then fighting on their terms. That's the opposite of what Mamdani did. Mamdani didn't run from his principles, didn't apologize for democratic socialism, didn't pretend to be something he's not. He stood on what he believes while being smart enough to get what he needs from someone who doesn't share those beliefs. And here's what's remarkable. Mamdani handed Democrats the playbook, showed them exactly how to win, made affordability the central issue of his campaign, free childcare, free buses, lower costs for street vendors by eliminating corrupt licensing fees, concrete, material benefits for working people, things that make their lives better in ways they can see and feel. That's what wins elections. Not abstract arguments about democracy or norms or constitutional principles, though those matter, but concrete improvements to people's lives. The ability to afford childcare, to get to work without spending money they don't have on bus fare, to start a business without getting squeezed by corrupt licensing schemes designed to benefit insiders. Mamdani understood that, built his entire campaign around it. Started at 1% in the polls and won because he stayed focused on what actually matters to voters. And instead of learning from that, instead of embracing the strategy that worked, establishment Democrats are still falling for Republican traps, still voting to denounce socialism, still afraid of their own shadow. Let me talk about what this means economically, because Mamdani's approach isn't just good politics, it's good policy. It's based on understanding what actually drives economic outcomes for ordinary people, what determines whether they can build wealth, achieve security, plan for the future. Childcare costs are destroying family budgets. Parents, especially mothers, are forced out of the workforce or forced to spend half their income on care for their kids. That's not just a family problem. That's an economic problem. It reduces labor force participation, reduces productivity, reduces the ability of families to save and invest and build wealth. Free childcare doesn't just help families. It helps the economy by removing a massive barrier to workforce participation. Transportation costs are a hidden tax on working people. If you have to spend $5 or $10 a day on bus fare to get to a job that pays barely above minimum wage, that's a significant chunk of your income. It makes work less worthwhile. Makes it harder to take jobs that might offer opportunity but require commuting. Free public transportation removes that barrier. Makes work more accessible. Makes economic mobility more possible. Licensing fees for street vendors, for small businesses, those aren't about public safety or quality control, though that's the excuse. They're about protecting established businesses from competition, about creating barriers to entry that favor people who already have capital, about making it harder for immigrants and working class people to start businesses. Eliminating those fees doesn't just help vendors, it helps consumers by increasing competition and lowering prices. It helps the economy by reducing barriers to entrepreneurship. These aren't radical ideas. They're practical responses to real problems. They're based on understanding that when you remove barriers that prevent people from working, from starting businesses, from participating in the economy, everyone benefits, the people affected directly, but also the broader economy through increased activity, increased productivity, increased innovation. That's what Mamdani campaigned on. That's what he won on. That's what he brought to his meeting with Trump. Not abstract ideology, not socialism as some theoretical framework, but concrete policies that would improve people's lives. And that's what Trump couldn't argue with. Because Trump can't say free childcare is bad, can't say making transportation affordable is wrong, can't say reducing corrupt licensing fees hurts anyone except the corrupt. So Trump couldn't fight on substance, could only fight on ego. And Mamdani gave Trump the ego win while getting the substantive commitments. That's how you negotiate with someone who cares more about how things look than how things work. You let them win the performance while you win the policy. Now, I've been investing for 80 years. I've seen a lot of politicians, a lot of strategies, a lot of approaches to getting things done in government. And what Mamdani did is rare. Most politicians, especially young ones, especially ones from the progressive wing, they lead with ideology, lead with principle, lead with moral arguments. And then they're surprised when that doesn't work with people who don't share their values. Mamdani led with results, led with what he could deliver, led with practical improvements to people's lives. And then, when dealing with Trump, he understood that getting results requires understanding what the other person needs. Trump needs to look powerful, needs to look magnanimous, needs to look like the Godfather dispensing favors. Fine, give him that. Let him have that performance, while getting the actual commitments that matter. That's maturity. That's strategic thinking. That's understanding that politics isn't about moral purity or ideological consistency. It's about getting things done, about improving people's lives, about using whatever leverage you have to achieve goals that matter, even if it means letting someone you consider a fascist look good in front of cameras while you get what you need to help your constituents. Some progressives will criticize Mamdani for this. Will say he normalized Trump. Will say he gave Trump legitimacy he doesn't deserve. Will say he should have refused to meet, should have maintained moral clarity, should have kept the focus on Trump's authoritarianism rather than finding ways to work with him. But that criticism misses the point. Mamdani's job isn't to be morally pure. His job is to represent his constituents, to deliver results, to make their lives better. And if that requires meeting with Trump, if that requires letting Trump play Godfather, if that requires giving Trump ego wins while getting policy wins, then that's what effective representation looks like. This is the difference between performative politics and actual politics. Performative politics is about looking good, about maintaining ideological purity, about making moral statements, about resisting in ways that feel good but don't accomplish anything. Actual politics is about leverage, about understanding what you want and what the other person wants and figuring out the deal, about getting concrete results, even when it requires compromising on things that don't matter to get things that do. Mamdani chose actual politics, chose results over performance, chose helping his constituents over maintaining some abstract moral position, and he got what he wanted. Got Trump's cooperation, got commitments on policy, got to stand by his principles, calling Trump a fascist to his face in the Oval Office, while still walking away with wins. That's sophistication. That's understanding how power actually works. That's knowing the difference between what matters and what doesn't. Trump can call himself magnanimous all he wants, can play Godfather all day, can have his ego stroked constantly. As long as Mamdani gets the policy commitments that help New Yorkers, who cares what Trump's ego needs? Let me contrast this with how most establishment Democrats operate. They care deeply about maintaining moral clarity, about not normalizing Trump, about resistance as performance, and they end up accomplishing nothing. They refuse to engage, refuse to negotiate, refuse to find areas of potential cooperation, and their constituents suffer for it. Or they do engage, but they do it badly. They go in defensive, apologetic, afraid, trying to avoid Trump's attacks instead of understanding how to get what they need from him. They let Trump control the interaction, set the terms, define success, and they walk away with nothing but the satisfaction of having maintained their dignity, which doesn't help anyone who needs childcare or affordable transportation or relief from corrupt licensing fees. Mamdani didn't do that. Went in with a plan, with a strategy, with clear goals, understanding what Trump needs and how to give it to him while getting what actually matters. That's competence. That's political skill. That's what more Democrats need to learn. Now, let's talk about the broader implications. Because what Mamdani demonstrated isn't just about one meeting with Trump. It's about how progressive policies can win, how Democrats can compete, how you build coalitions that include people who don't necessarily share your ideology but do share your goals. The Democratic Socialist label scares a lot of people, scares moderate voters, scares establishment Democrats, scares donors. There's this whole conversation about whether progressive candidates can win, whether democratic socialism is too radical, whether the party needs to move to the center to compete. But Mamdani showed that's the wrong question. The question isn't whether socialism is too radical. The question is whether you can deliver concrete benefits people want. If you can make childcare free, make buses free, make it easier to start a business, people don't care what you call it. They care that their lives are better, that they have more money in their pockets, that opportunities exist that didn't before. That's what Republicans understand, and Democrats often don't. Republicans don't win on ideology. They win on resentment and fear and cultural signaling. But when Democrats try to compete on that terrain, they lose, because they're playing someone else's game, playing on someone else's terms. What Mamdani did was change the game, made it about material benefits, about affordability, about concrete improvements people can see and feel. And suddenly ideology doesn't matter. Labels don't matter. Whether you call it democratic socialism or pragmatic progressivism or whatever other term focus groups prefer, it doesn't matter. What matters is whether you're delivering results, and that's economically sound. Because the policies Mamdani advocated for, the policies he got Trump to engage with, those aren't just politically popular. They're economically efficient. They remove barriers to productivity. They increase workforce participation. They promote competition and entrepreneurship. They reduce the hidden taxes that burden working families and prevent economic mobility. Free childcare increases labor force participation, especially among women. That's more productive workers, more economic output, more tax revenue, more families able to save and invest and build wealth. The economic benefits dwarf the costs. Free public transportation reduces commuting costs, which functions as a regressive tax on working people, reduces traffic congestion, reduces pollution, makes cities more accessible and economically dynamic. The economic benefits are clear and well documented. Eliminating corrupt licensing schemes reduces barriers to entrepreneurship, increases competition, lowers prices for consumers, creates opportunities for people who've been shut out of markets by regulatory capture. That's basic economics. That's removing inefficiency and letting markets work better. These aren't radical ideas that require believing in socialism. These are practical policies that improve economic outcomes. That's what makes Mamdani's approach so powerful. He's not asking people to accept an ideology. He's offering them concrete benefits. And when you frame it that way, when you lead with results instead of labels, you can build coalitions that span ideological divides. That's what scared establishment Democrats about Mamdani's campaign. Not that he might lose, but that he might win, might prove that progressive policies are popular, might demonstrate that democratic socialism, properly explained and focused on material benefits, can attract voters who'd never consider themselves socialists. And he did win, started at 1% and won, because he stayed focused on what matters to voters, on affordability, on making their lives better, on removing barriers that prevent them from thriving. And establishment Democrats, instead of learning from that, instead of embracing what works, are still voting to denounce socialism, still falling for Republican traps, still more afraid of labels than focused on results. The vote in the House this week, the resolution denouncing socialism that 85 Democrats supported, that's everything wrong with how establishment Democrats operate. They're so afraid of Republican attacks that they'll vote against their own principles, so worried about how things look that they ignore what actually matters, so focused on avoiding labels that they abandon policies. That resolution doesn't just denounce some abstract concept of socialism, it implicitly attacks Social Security, Medicare, public education, every program that involves government providing services, every policy that puts public benefit above private profit. That's what those 85 Democrats voted for. Not because they actually oppose those programs, but because they're afraid of being called socialists. That's political malpractice. That's letting Republicans define the terms. That's fighting on terrain where you've already lost. And it's economically destructive, because the programs they're implicitly attacking, the policies they're distancing themselves from, those are the things that actually help their constituents, that provide security, that enable economic mobility, that make capitalism work for more than just the wealthy. When you vote to denounce socialism, you're voting to undermine the argument for public investment, for social insurance, for government action to correct market failures. You're accepting the Republican framing that government helping people is bad, that public provision of services is inherently wrong, that only market solutions are legitimate. That's not just bad politics. It's bad economics, because markets fail constantly, in predictable ways. Childcare is undersupplied because it's not profitable at prices working families can afford. Transportation is inefficient when provided purely through private markets. Licensing should protect consumers, but instead protects established businesses from competition. These are market failures. They require government intervention. And calling that intervention socialism and then voting to denounce it is accepting that market failures should go uncorrected. Mamdani understands this, understands that government provision of services isn't socialism in some radical sense. It's pragmatic response to market failure. It's using collective resources to solve problems markets can't solve efficiently. It's recognizing that some goods, like childcare and transportation and protection from corrupt licensing schemes, are better provided publicly than left to markets. And he doesn't apologize for it, doesn't hide from the democratic socialist label, doesn't try to rebrand as something more moderate. He embraces what he believes while being smart enough to frame it in ways that appeal to people regardless of ideology. That's political sophistication. That's understanding that most people don't care about labels. They care about results. Now, I want to come back to the meeting with Trump, because there's another lesson there that's worth examining. Mamdani understood something fundamental about Trump that most Democrats miss. Trump doesn't care about policy, doesn't have strong ideological commitments, doesn't have deeply held beliefs about how government should work. What Trump cares about is ego, about looking powerful, about winning, about being seen as the smartest person in the room, about having people defer to him, about getting credit, about the performance of leadership rather than the substance. That's not a weakness to bemoan. That's an opportunity to exploit. Because if Trump doesn't care about substance, if he only cares about how things look, you can get substantive wins by giving him performative wins. You can achieve policy goals by letting him claim credit. You can advance your agenda by making it look like his idea. Mamdani did that, made Trump look magnanimous, made Trump look like the Godfather, made Trump look powerful and secure enough to meet with critics and dismiss insults. And in exchange, got commitments on policy, got cooperation, got Trump invested in helping New York. Because now Trump's ego is tied to the success of initiatives Mamdani wants. Now Trump wants to be able to claim credit for improving lives in New York. Now Trump has incentive to actually deliver because his self-image requires it. That's leverage. That's understanding human psychology. That's recognizing that the best way to get what you want from someone is to make them want to give it to you, to align their incentives with yours, to make your success their success. Most Democrats don't do that with Trump. They try to beat him, try to prove he's wrong, try to win arguments, try to demonstrate moral superiority, and Trump doesn't care about any of that. Doesn't care if you prove he's wrong, doesn't care about moral superiority, only cares about ego, about whether he looks good. So by fighting on substance, by trying to win arguments, Democrats play a game Trump isn't even playing. They focus on being right while Trump focuses on looking powerful. And guess who wins? The person who understands what game is actually being played. Mamdani understood. Played the game Trump is actually playing. Gave Trump the ego wins he craves while getting the substantive wins that actually matter. Let Trump be the godfather while being smart enough to get what he needs from the godfather. That's not weakness. That's not normalization. That's sophistication. And it produced results. Produced a meeting where a Democratic socialist who Trump threatened to deport walked out with commitments to help New York. Where someone who called Trump a fascist got cooperation instead of retaliation. Where a young state senator with no federal power got the President of the United States to publicly give him permission to insult him. That's a win. Not a moral win. Not an ideological win. A practical win. The kind that actually helps people. And Democrats need more of those. Need more politicians who understand how to get things done even when it requires working with people they despise. Who understand that purity is the enemy of progress. Who understand that helping constituents matters more than maintaining ideological consistency. Now, the media missed all of this. Wanted fireworks. Wanted confrontation. Wanted Mamdani to either back down from calling Trump a fascist or wanted Trump to lash out. When neither happened, when both Mamdani and Trump stayed disciplined and focused on what they wanted to accomplish, the media was confused, kept pushing, kept asking whether Mamdani still thinks Trump is a fascist, kept trying to create the conflict they expected, and both Mamdani and Trump, for different reasons, refused to give it to them. Mamdani because he understood that the substance mattered more than the performance. Trump because Mamdani had given him a better performance, where he got to look magnanimous instead of defensive. That's another lesson. The media wants conflict, wants drama, wants clear heroes and villains, but effective politics often looks boring, looks like compromise, looks like people with different ideologies finding ways to work together. The media doesn't know how to cover that, doesn't understand it, defaults to trying to create the conflict they understand. But Mamdani didn't take the bait, stayed focused on his goals, on getting cooperation from Trump, on advancing policies that help New Yorkers, on proving that democratic socialism can deliver results. And he succeeded. Not despite the media's confusion, but partly because of it. Because the media's focus on trying to create drama distracted from what was actually happening, which was a masterclass in political strategy. Let me bring this back to economics one more time. Because what Mamdani demonstrated isn't just politically smart, it's economically necessary. The policies he's advocating for, the material benefits he's focused on, those aren't luxuries. They're not nice to haves. They're essential for economic mobility, for shared prosperity, for capitalism that works for more than just the wealthy. When childcare costs force parents out of the workforce, that's not just their problem. That's lost productivity, lost tax revenue, lost economic potential. It's inefficient, it's wasteful, it's bad economics. When transportation costs create barriers to employment, when people can't take jobs because they can't afford to get there, that's market failure. That's friction that prevents optimal allocation of labor. That's economic inefficiency that hurts everyone. When corrupt licensing schemes protect established businesses from competition, when regulatory capture prevents entrepreneurship, when barriers to entry favor insiders over innovators, that's not free market capitalism. That's cronyism. That's using government power to prevent markets from working. Mamdani's policies address all of that, address real economic problems with practical solutions. And the fact that he calls it democratic socialism instead of pragmatic capitalism or whatever label might poll better, that doesn't change the economics, doesn't change whether the policies work, doesn't change whether they improve outcomes. And that's what establishment Democrats need to understand. The label doesn't matter. What matters is whether you're delivering results, whether you're solving problems, whether you're making people's lives better in concrete, material ways they can see and feel. Mamdani proved you can do that. Proved democratic socialism can win. Proved progressive policies are popular when properly explained. Proved you can get cooperation even from people who should theoretically oppose you if you understand leverage and incentives and how to give people what they need while getting what you want. That's the lesson. Not that Democrats should all become socialists, but that they should all focus on material benefits, on affordability, on removing barriers that prevent people from thriving, on policies that work, regardless of what you call them, and on political strategy that understands how to achieve goals, even when it requires working with people you despise. That's what Mamdani did. That's what more Democrats need to learn. That's how you win. Not through moral purity or ideological consistency, through results, through sophistication, through understanding that politics is about leverage and incentives and getting things done. And if that means letting Trump play Godfather, if that means giving ego wins while getting substantive wins, if that means looking less pure while accomplishing more, then that's what effective representation looks like. That's what constituents deserve. That's what democracy requires. Not performance. Results.